Everyone believed Evan Brooks had betrayed House Ravencroft. 3 nights before one of the most powerful vampire weddings the city had seen in a century, Lady Seraphine Ravencroft's heavy-set human assistant vanished without a single word, and a vault of sealed blood ledgers vanished with him. Lucian, the man Seraphine was about to marry, called him a thief. The elders of the house demanded blood. Even the evidence seemed impossible to argue with. But Seraphine couldn't silence the feeling that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Instead of sending hunters into the night to drag the man back, she went alone. She drove herself across the city to the crumbling building where Evan lived, a place Seraphine, in 5 years, had never once thought to visit. When no one answered, she tore the door off its hinges with one hand. Inside, on a cold bathroom floor, she found the man everyone had condemned. Evan lay crumpled against the tub, his oversized sweater black with dried blood, one trembling hand pressed to a knife wound in his side, the other locked around a small obsidian drive he would not let go of even as he slipped toward death. With the last of his strength, Evan looked up into the face of a creature who had not felt fear in 200 years, and he whispered 7 words that broke everything Seraphine thought she knew. Don't marry Lucian. It's all a trap. Before we go any further, this channel, Nightborn Lady, is brand new, and every single subscribe is what keeps stories like this one alive. It's free, it takes 1 second, and it means more than you could possibly know. Hit that subscribe button, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight, and let's step back into the dark together. 5 years. That was how long Evan Brooks had served Lady Seraphine Ravencroft, without taking a single unscheduled night off. He arrived before the rest of the house stirred and stayed long after the last of them had gone to ground. He remembered every cipher, every shipment, every blood debt, every territory line, every promise Seraphine had ever made to ally or enemy. If someone needed to know which courier had crossed the river on a moonless Tuesday 3 years ago, or where a treaty had been signed before the war with the Northern Covens, they did not ask Seraphine. They asked Evan. He kept it all in a black leather ledger he carried everywhere, page after page of his own cramped shorthand, a private record no one else could read. 5 years of entries. Every name, every favor, every quiet warning he'd swallowed because no one had asked. The ledger went where Evan went, and Evan went unseen. Because to the rest of the immortal world, he barely existed. He was the human. The heavy-set assistant in plain cardigans and worn shoes, sitting quietly outside the lady's study, carrying folders instead of blades. In a house full of beautiful, ageless predators, he was the one warm heartbeat in the building, and somehow that made him easier to forget. Visitors swept past his desk and never registered his face. Elders who had walked the earth for centuries looked straight through him. Seraphine never underestimated him. She simply assumed he would always be there. That assumption shattered on a gray, sunless evening, the kind where the clouds hang so low the city forgets the sky exists. Evan still hasn't checked in, Oliver Pierce said, setting a tablet on the edge of the lady's desk. Seraphine barely glanced up from the marriage accord spread before her, pages of gilded vampire law binding House Ravencroft to House Mortlake. Call him. I already did. No answer. His phone's been disconnected. That was wrong. That was deeply wrong. Seraphine set down her pen. In 5 years, Evan had answered work calls from a hospital chapel while his own mother lay 2 rooms away. The man did not go silent. Silence was not in him. When did anyone last see him? Oliver hesitated. 3 nights ago. The study went very still. 3 nights ago, he went on quietly, was the same night the sealed ledgers disappeared from the lower vault. The timing was a knife of its own. Within the hour, the rumor had spread through every floor of the Ravencroft estate. Someone had stolen the house's most protected records. Someone had betrayed the family. By the time the moon was high, every immortal in the building had already decided who. Evan Brooks. Tried and convicted before a single question had been asked. There was a thing about Evan that no one in the house remembered, because it had happened with no witnesses but the two of them. 5 years ago, in his very first month, Evan had walked into the study without knocking, carrying a tray, doing his job, and caught Seraphine mid-feed. The fangs. The black, blown-out eyes. The blood. The thing beneath the elegant gown the world was never meant to see. Any sane human would have run screaming into the night. Evan had set the tray down with steady hands, said, "I'll come back when you've finished, my lady," and quietly closed the door. He never told a soul. He never asked for protection or leverage or a raise. He simply came back the next evening and did his work as though nothing had changed. Seraphine had never forgotten it, and had also, somehow, never thanked him for it. That was the shape of their whole relationship, she would realize too late. 5 years of Evan giving, and Seraphine assuming the giving would go on forever. When Lucian Mortlake swept into the study an hour later, his expression carried far more irritation than concern. "I warned you about him," he said. Seraphine looked up. "Warned me about what?" He was too quiet. "And what is that supposed to mean?" "It means," Lucian said, draping himself into a chair as if he already owned it, "that people like him spend years watching everyone else. The quiet ones. They wait. They count. And then, when the moment is perfect, they take everything they've been counting." He spread his hands. "He vanished with your sealed records 3 nights before our binding. If that isn't betrayal, my love, I don't know what is." Seraphine said nothing, not because she agreed, because something refused to fit. Evan had held the keys to the entire house for 5 years. He had access to records that could have burned House Ravencroft to its foundations. If the man had wanted to betray her, he could have done it quietly, months ago, with enough evidence to end them all, and walked away rich and untraceable. So why now? Why 3 nights before the wedding? Why leave behind almost everything he owned? Across the room, Oliver shifted uneasily by the window and said nothing at all. That night, Seraphine stood alone in Evan's office. Everything was exactly as the man had left it. A cup of cold tea beside the keyboard. Sticky notes papering the edge of the monitor, reminders for meetings that were supposed to happen next week. Beneath a neat stack of invoices, a medical bill. Beside it, in Evan's careful hand, a grocery list. Milk, soup, mother's medicine. Nothing about it looked like a man planning to disappear forever. Seraphine opened the bottom drawer of the desk. Inside lay spare reading glasses, a row of worn notebooks, and dozens of handwritten schedules. Nothing valuable. Nothing stolen. Her eyes settled on a small framed photograph at the back of the drawer. Evan, younger, stood beside an older woman in a wheelchair. Both were smiling despite the obvious exhaustion in their faces. His mother, and Seraphine felt something tighten in a chest that hadn't drawn a true breath in 2 centuries. In 5 years, she had never once asked Evan about his family. Not once. She knew the names of every rival elder on the continent. She did not know whether her own assistant had a mother still living. A knock. Oliver stepped inside. "We found his address." "Where?" He hesitated. "You're not going to like it." 20 minutes later, the black sedan rolled into one of the oldest, poorest districts on the south side of the city. A place House Ravencroft's empire of blood and gold had never bothered to touch. The streets were cracked. Half the street lamps were dead. The apartment buildings looked as though they'd survived decades of neglect through pure stubbornness. Seraphine stared through the windshield. This can't be right. Oliver checked the paper again. Apartment 4C. I pay him enough to live anywhere in this city. Apparently, Oliver said quietly, he didn't. The building smelled of damp concrete and rust. Every step on the narrow staircase echoed up the stairwell. Apartment 4C stood at the end of a long corridor lit by a single dying bulb. Seraphine knocked. Nothing. She knocked harder. Silence, and then it reached her. Faint, beneath the door. A smell that made every ancient instinct in her body go razor sharp. Blood. Human blood. And not fresh. She didn't think. One movement, and the aging lock gave way with a crack like a snapped bone. The door swung inward into darkness, and cold, still air spilled out into the hall. Seraphine crossed the threshold. The apartment was nearly empty. A folding table. An old laptop. Stacks of folders, each one labeled in that same careful hand. No television. No comfort. No decoration. Nothing that said a life is lived here, only the evidence of survival. Then she saw it. A thin trail of dried blood leading down the hallway toward a half-open bathroom door. She crossed the apartment in 3 silent strides and pushed the door open. Evan Brooks lay crumpled against the bathtub. His sweater was soaked black. One hand pressed weakly against a deep knife wound in his side, the other was locked around a small obsidian drive, fingers gone white with the strength of holding on. He looked nothing like the composed man who had run an empire from a desk for 5 years. He looked starved. Exhausted, frozen, alone, the heater had died long ago. The only sound in the apartment was a dripping faucet, and beneath it, barely, faintly, a heartbeat. Seraphine dropped to her knees. And that was when the smell of all that blood hit her properly. Hot and copper and human, flooding a body built to crave exactly this. For the first time and longer than she could remember, the hunger rose up black-eyed and screaming, ready to take. She had killed for less, killed strangers for the crime of being in the wrong alley at the wrong hour. But she looked down at Evan's gray face, the man who had kept her secret for 5 years, and asked for nothing. And the hunger met something it had never met before. It met fear. Not fear of being caught. Fear of losing him. And the hunger, for the first time in 2 centuries, lost Evan. Her voice came out cracked. Evan, it's me. Eyelids fluttered. The man struggled to focus, then found Seraphine's face, and for one brief, terrible second, relief softened all that fear. You came, Evan breathed. Yourself, I should have come sooner. Seraphine pressed a hand to the wound. So much blood already gone. Who did this to you? Evan tried to smile. Pain stole it before it formed. They're watching. Seraphine's head came up. She scanned the apartment with senses no human could match. No movement. No breath but Evan's. No one but the 2 of them. She gently worked the obsidian drive from those locked fingers. I have it. I've got it now. No. Weak fingers caught her sleeve. Hide it. Promise me. I promise. Only then did the man relax. Seraphine saw the rest of it now. Fresh bruises ringing Evan's wrists, split knuckles, a torn sleeve. This had been no robbery. Someone had questioned him. Someone had expected him to hand over what was on that drive. He never did. Evan. Who did this? Couldn't trust anyone. His breathing hitched. They're inside the house. Who is? Evan looked straight up into the eyes of the most dangerous creature he had ever met, and said the thing he had nearly died to say. The wedding. A cough racked him, and blood darkened the corner of his mouth. Don't marry Lucian. It's a trap. Seraphine went perfectly, terribly still. What do you mean? The alliance, another shallow breath, was never real. Outside, the rain began. House Mortlake doesn't want your empire, my lady. Evan's voice was barely a thread now. They want what's left of it. His eyes fought to stay open. After you turn to ash. The words settled over the freezing little bathroom like frost. Seraphine had spent 8 months negotiating this marriage. Every lawyer had blessed it. Every elder had toasted it. Every projection had promised the house a century of expansion. And here, on a cold floor, bleeding out, the one person who had never once lied to her was looking up with absolute certainty. He wasn't guessing. He knew. How? Seraphine whispered. Found the transfers. Evan's head tilted weakly toward the hallway. Laptop. Hidden accounts. Payments to someone inside your own house. Who? Couldn't finish. His eyes were closing. They found me first. But I copied everything. The drive is proof. Evan, stay with me. He didn't answer. Seraphine gathered the man into her arms, his heavy frame all but weightless against her supernatural strength, and what undid her was not the lifting but the stillness of him. The gray, hollow exhaustion of a body that had been running on nothing for far too long. Beneath those oversized sweaters the whole house had mocked, the heavy-set assistant, the human, the one nobody noticed, was a man worn down by skipped meals, sleepless nights, and 5 years of putting everyone else first. He had hidden his suffering as carefully as he had hidden the secrets of an empire. On his way out, on her way out, carrying him, Seraphine's gaze caught the kitchen, 1 cabinet, 3 cans of soup, half a loaf of stale bread, a bottle of expired medicine, nothing else. This was how the man who guarded a fortune had been living. And Seraphine remembered every extravagant gift she had traded with House Mortlake during the wedding planning. Every cup of blood wine raised to a future built on a lie. Not once had she wondered why Evan always declined the invitations. Not once had she asked if the man needed help. Outside in the rain, Oliver's face went slack when he saw what Seraphine was carrying. My God. Call Dr. Sutton, Seraphine ordered. Not through the house. His private line. You don't want our own physician? If there's a traitor inside my house, she said, and her voice had gone cold enough to frost the windows, then I trust no one connected to it. No one. She laid Evan across the back seat as gently as if the man were made of glass. Just before the dark took him again, Evan's hand found Seraphine's sleeve one last time. There are copies, he breathed. Where? My mother's nursing home. Locker 17. His eyes drifted shut. And my lady, if anything happens to me, it won't, Seraphine said. For the first time in 5 years, Evan let himself believe her. His hand slipped away. The sedan pulled into the rain. And across the street, in the dark, a parked car neither of them had noticed flickered to life. Inside, a figure lifted a phone. They found him. A calm voice answered from the other end. Then moved to phase 2. By the time the sun should have been rising, though no one in that house would ever feel it, only 4 people knew Evan Brooks was still alive. Seraphine, Oliver Pierce. Dr. Harold Sutton, the one human physician in the city who knew exactly what House Ravencroft was. And Evan himself. Everyone else, including Lucian Mortlake and his father, still believed the assistant was a runaway thief vanishing into the dark with stolen records. Seraphine intended to keep it that way for as long as it served her. Dr. Sutton finished changing the bandages and stepped into the hall, peeling off bloody gloves. The blade missed his heart by less than a finger's width, he said quietly. It was silvered, my lady. Whoever did this wasn't planning to leave a body that could be raised. Another hour on that floor, and there would have been nothing for me to save. Through the open door, Seraphine watched Evan sleep. His breathing had finally steadied. Can he talk? In short bursts. Can he work? Sutton gave her a flat look. Absolutely not. Seraphine nodded slowly. He'll try anyway. then stop him. For the first time in longer than she could count, someone had given Lady Seraphine Ravencroft an order instead of begging her for a favor. To his quiet astonishment, she agreed. There was a choice in front of Seraphine that she did not speak aloud, because speaking it would have made it real. She could save Evan permanently. One bite. One night. The wound, the exhaustion, the silvered blade, the years of going without, all of it gone. Evan would never be cold or hungry or overlooked again, because he would be the immortal world. And it would be the most selfish thing Seraphine had ever done. Because Evan had never asked for it. Because turning someone to keep them was not a gift, it was a theft dressed as one. A choice stolen from a person who had spent 5 years having every choice made for him by people who never bothered to learn his mother's name. She had watched 1,000 mortals die in 2 centuries and felt nothing. She sat by this one's bed all night and decided that if Evan lived, he would live as himself. Human, whole, choosing his own road. And Seraphine would simply have to learn to bear the terror of loving something that could die. She had never been afraid of anything. She was afraid now. Late the next evening, against every protest Dr. Sutton could mount, Evan insisted on sitting up at a desk. He looked terrible, pale, slow, every movement careful around the wound. But his eyes were exactly as sharp as they had always been. Seraphine set the obsidian drive beside the laptop. "Can you open it?" "I encrypted it myself. Can anyone else?" A faint, tired smile. Not if they're fond of their machine. His fingers moved over the keys, and lines of code spilled down the screen. Folders bloomed one after another. Shipping manifests, blood tithes, private correspondence between houses going back years. Then one folder opened, and the title made Seraphine go still. Wedding budget. "That's not a budget," Evan whispered. "It never was." He clicked. Instead of florists and feast halls, dozens of hidden transactions filled the screen. Money, staggering amounts of it, had been flowing out of shell companies controlled by House Mortlake into secret offshore accounts for nearly 8 months, and every single payment ended in the same authorization stamp. CR-17. Seraphine stared. "I've never used that seal. I know." Evan enlarged another document. "It belongs to someone inside your own house. Someone with the authority to move house funds without your sign-off." Oliver leaned in over his shoulder. "Can we find out who?" "If we trace where the seal originated." Evan opened another file, and a glowing map unfolded across the screen, every secure terminal in House Ravencroft scattered like stars. One pulsed red. Seraphine recognized it the instant it appeared. "That's my uncle's study," she said softly. "That's Caspian's." The room went silent as a tomb. Lord Caspian Ravencroft. Her sire, the elder who had found her dying in a gutter 200 years ago and chosen to give her eternity instead of letting her go. The one who had raised her through her first ravenous decades, taught her control, taught her the law, taught her the rule she lived by. Never accuse anyone until you can prove they have nowhere left to run. The one she had trusted with every coin and every secret the house owned. Oliver lowered himself slowly into a chair. "That's not possible." Seraphine said nothing. Over the last 2 days, impossible had been happening with remarkable consistency. "There's more," Evan murmured. He pulled up a string of deleted messages, recovered from backups Caspian had been too arrogant to think anyone could reach. One had never been sent. Subject: final transfer before the rite. Seraphine read every line without breathing. The wedding had never been meant to join 2 houses. It had been designed to end one. After the binding rite, Seraphine was to be honored at a private reception aboard a House Ravencroft yacht, A dawn communion. An old vampire ceremony held as the night thinned toward morning. The guest list had already been quietly arranged. The crew had already been replaced. The window shutters below decks, the ones that kept the killing light out, had already been rigged to fail on a timer. 2 hours into the voyage, with no safe harbor and no dark to flee into, the dawn would do what no blade could. Lady Seraphine Ravencroft would burn to ash on the open water. A tragic accident. The sun, they would say. A faulty ship. Such a loss. And then Caspian would step in to steward the grieving house. Lord Aldrich Mortlake, Lucian's father, would quietly absorb the Ravencroft territories through emergency clauses buried deep in the marriage accord. Lucian would inherit nothing but a widower's sympathy and a fortune. It had all been planned for months. Oliver looked up, ashen. They've already divided your house between them. Seraphine closed the laptop with one slow, deliberate hand. No, she said. They've divided what they think is about to become theirs. But there was a wrinkle the conspirators had never accounted for, and Evan was the one who found it. The lower vault, he said. The one the ledgers came from. It's sealed with blood wards, my lady. Old ones. Anything immortal that tries to open it without your blood trips the alarm and locks it down. I know. I commissioned them. So did Caspian, Evan said. He helped design them. He knew no vampire in the house could get into that vault without you knowing. He managed something close to a smile. But the wards were built to stop your kind. They were never built to stop mine. Seraphine understood, and the understanding was almost too much. The blood wards read for immortal blood. They had no defense against a warm, beating, ordinary human heart walking past them with a key. Because no one, not Caspian, not Aldrich, not Lucian, not one of them in 2 centuries of scheming had ever imagined that the human would be the threat. The assistant. The heavy-set man in the cardigan they all looked straight through. They had built a fortress to keep out gods and forgotten to lock the door against the one person beneath their notice. You walked into the most secure vault in the house, Seraphine said slowly, because they never once thought to count you. Evan looked down at his own hands. I've spent my whole life being uncounted, my lady. I just decided to use it for once. Seraphine made no announcement. The wedding stayed on the calendar. The rehearsal feast stayed scheduled. Every invitation stayed active. She wanted the conspirators comfortable. Confident creatures grow careless, and careless creatures leave evidence. Meanwhile, Oliver drove out to the assisted living facility where Marion Brooks spent her days and found Locker 17 exactly as Evan had promised. A second drive, printed statements, photographs, copies of signed accords, handwritten notes in Evan's careful shorthand linking Caspian Ravencroft to Aldrich Mortlake, dated and detailed. And tucked beneath it all, the black leather ledger. 5 years of entries. Every name that had ever passed Evan's desk. Every favor. Every quiet warning no one had asked him to give. The whole hidden architecture of the house, written down by the one person everyone had agreed, didn't matter. When Oliver spread it all across the study table after dark, he shook his head slowly. There's no denying any of this, not in any court, mortal or otherwise. Seraphine ran a fingertip down a page of that careful handwriting and thought of the rule Caspian had taught her, 200 years ago, in a voice she had once trusted with her life. Never accuse anyone until you can prove they have nowhere left to run. Ironic, she thought, that the old man had forgotten his own lesson. Just before the house went still for the day, Seraphine slipped into Evan's room, carrying 2 cups of warm blood tea, the human version, gentle. The kind Sutton allowed. Evan was awake. You should be resting. So should you. Seraphine handed him a cup. For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, "I owe you an apology." Evan looked genuinely startled. "For what?" "For believing, even for a moment, that you could have betrayed me." Seraphine turned the cup in her pale hands. "You had the proof. I had only my assumptions, and I let them speak first." Evan lowered his eyes. "I've always been easy to blame." "What does that mean?" A quiet, worn little laugh. "I'm the invisible one, my lady. The human. The assistant. The heavy-set man nobody notices until something goes wrong and they need someone to point at." He looked toward the dark window. "When important people walk into a room, they remember the gown. They remember Lucian's smile. They remember your 200 years. Nobody remembers the man carrying the folders." He was quiet a moment. "But I learned a long time ago, invisible people hear everything." Seraphine studied him in the lamplight and thought of all the conversations Evan must have overheard while elders dismissed him as furniture. All the disasters he must have quietly steered the house away from without ever once asking to be thanked. 5 years. He hadn't just organized an empire, he had been protecting it. And Seraphine had never truly seen him at all. A knock at the door. Oliver stepped in without a word and laid a sealed envelope on the table. "What is it?" Seraphine asked. "Came by courier an hour ago. No sender. No return address." Inside was a single photograph. Seraphine, caught on a grainy lens, standing outside Evan's building in the rain, carrying a body in her arms. Across the bottom, someone had typed 5 words. "We know he's still alive." The room went cold. Evan's hand tightened around his cup. The conspirators thought they had the upper hand now. They thought a threat would make Seraphine flinch, make her hide, make her run. They had no idea they had just told her exactly how little time she had, and that the man they'd left for dead on a bathroom floor had already handed her everything she needed to bury them all. If this story has its claws in you, take a second, subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments how many entries you think Evan has written in that ledger by now after 5 years in the dark. There are so many more stories like this one waiting for you. Only on Nightborn Lady. The night of the wedding arrived beneath a sky bruised with storm clouds, and to every guest sweeping through the towering doors of St. Augustine's, everything looked exactly as it should. Black cars lined the wet streets for 3 blocks. Inside, the cathedral glowed with 1,000 candles, vampires merry in the deep of night. When the dark belongs to them, and the front pews filled with the immortal aristocracy of the city. Elders centuries old, heads of allied houses, politicians and judges who owed favors they could never repay. The binding of House Ravencroft to House Mortlake had become far more than a wedding. It was a public declaration that 2 ancient powers were about to become one. Only Seraphine knew it was about to become something else entirely. She stood alone in a private chamber behind the sanctuary, fastening the last clasp of a gown the color of old wine. Oliver slipped in without a sound. "Our people are in position. Every door," he murmured. "Caspian's in the front row, certain everything's proceeding to schedule." And Lucian's smiling. Seraphine looked at her own reflection one last time, 200 years old, and still capable of being surprised by betrayal. "Good," she said softly. "People smile widest when they think they've already won." Across the hall, Lucian Mortlake admired himself in a tall mirror while his father adjusted his cufflinks behind him. "Everything's ready," Lord Aldrich Mortlake said, low and pleased. "The Accord waits for her signature the moment the rite is done. The yacht's crew is replaced, the shutters rigged. The communion sails 2 hours before dawn." He smiled like a man counting money. "By the time the sun comes up over the water, the Ravencroft Empire will belong to us. All of it. And the great Lady Seraphine will be a smudge of ash and a very sad story." Neither of them noticed the tiny recording device tucked inside the white roses of the bouquet on the dressing table, or that every word they spoke was streaming, clean and clear, straight to an earpiece behind the sanctuary, where Oliver pressed 2 fingers to his ear and exhaled. "Recording confirmed," he said. "Every word." And in the chamber behind the altar, Seraphine closed her eyes for 1 slow second. "Thank you, Evan." The cathedral bells began to toll. The guests rose. Music swelled to fill the vaulted ceiling. Seraphine walked the long aisle alone, with the unhurried grace of a woman strolling toward a future she had already decided. She reached the altar. Lucian took his place across from her, radiant and false. The efficient and ancient of the houses, robed in black and silver, welcomed the gathering and began the old words. Vows, oaths in a language older than the cathedral, promises of blood and bond and shared eternity. And then the question came. "Lady Seraphine Ravencroft," the efficient intoned, "do you take Lucian Mortlake into your house, your blood, and your eternity?" Silence. The efficient waited. The candles guttered. Somewhere in the back, a guest coughed. Lucian's smile held, began to thin. Seraphine turned. Not to him. She turned to face the hundreds of immortals filling the cathedral, and into the breathless quiet she said one word. No, it rang off the stone like a struck bell. Confusion broke across the front pews. Lucian's smile collapsed. "What?" I said no. "Seraphine," he forced a laugh. "This isn't funny." "I agree completely," she said, and reached into the folds of her gown. A ripple of alarm went through the immortal crowd, old instincts, old fears, the assumption of a blade. What she drew out instead was a small obsidian drive. She lifted it, and Oliver, from the dark room, brought the cathedral's great screens to life, the ones installed to display wedding portraits to the gathered houses. The screens woke. And one after another, the evidence fell. Bank transfers, encrypted messages, shell companies, offshore accounts. 8 months of money flowing from House Mortlake into the dark, each transaction stamped with a seal that did not belong to Seraphine. A murmur swept the pews and grew into a rising tide. Then Oliver played the recording, and Lord Aldrich Mortlake's own voice rolled out across the cathedral, smug and unmistakable. "By the time the sun comes up over the water, the Ravencroft Empire will belong to us." Aldrich shot to his feet, the color draining from his ancient face. Lucian lunged toward the dark room. "Shut it off, shut it off." Oliver stepped neatly out of his path. "There are 12 backup copies," he said pleasantly. 3 of them already off-site. Sit down. Seraphine's eyes found one figure in the front row, sitting very still. "Caspian," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the stone. "Would you care to explain the offshore transfers? The ones authorized under Seal Car 17? The old vampire laughed, dry, careful. "That proves nothing, child. A seal is a string of symbols. Anyone could they?" Seraphine nodded toward the screens. Beside every payment, a digital signature resolved into focus. The same one, over and over, traced through the house's own systems to a single terminal, in a single study, belonging to a single elder. Lord Caspian Ravencroft. He stopped laughing. Slowly, all across the cathedral, ancient faces turned toward him. "For 200 years, Seraphine said, taking one unhurried step forward, I believed loyalty was something you inherited, that blood made you family, that the one who sired me into this eternity could never turn his fangs on me. Another step. I was wrong. Loyalty isn't inherited." She let the silence stretch. "It's earned." Caspian moved. Old as he was, fast as he was off the pew and halfway to the side door before most of the guests had registered it. He never reached it. The figures who closed in around him were not the guards he had so carefully bribed into position. They were Seraphine's oldest people, the ones who had stood with her before Caspian ever schemed, whose loyalty had never once been for sale. They took him by the arms, and the elder who had taught Seraphine the law went down struggling beneath the weight of it. Aldrich tried to follow his way out and found the great doors of St. Augustine's swinging open from the other side. The figures who entered wore long coats and badges, and behind them came others with no badges at all. The quiet enforcement arm that handled matters the mortal world was never meant to learn about. Oliver had delivered every piece of evidence, anonymously, before the candles were even lit. The lead investigator unfolded a warrant in the candlelight. Lord Aldrich Mortlake. You're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, and a great many things we'll be discussing at length. The cathedral erupted. Guests surged backward. Immortals who had spent the evening toasting the Union now scrambled to be seen leaving it. Somewhere a glass shattered. The careful, gilded performance of the most powerful wedding of the decade collapsed into the biggest scandal the houses had seen in a generation. Lucian, abandoned by his father and his future in the same breath, turned desperately to Seraphine. "You'd take your assistant's word over mine?" he spat. "A human? A nobody who ran and bled out on a floor where he belonged?" Seraphine answered without raising her voice. "No, I'd take the evidence over you. And I'd take the man who nearly died protecting me over the one who arranged my murder, any night of any century." She tilted her head. "And besides, Lucian, he didn't bleed out." Uncertainty flickered across his face for the first time. "Evan is dead." Seraphine's expression did not change at all. "Is he?" The great doors of the cathedral swung open one more time, and every voice in the building fell silent. Evan Brooks walked in. He moved slowly, one hand resting lightly on a cane, the marks of what had been done to him still plain beneath a simple dark navy suit. He wore no jewels. He had done nothing to dazzle the room. He was, by every measure the immortal aristocracy used, the least important person who had ever crossed that threshold. And every single eye in the cathedral followed him up the aisle. The man they had all called a traitor. The runaway. The heavy-set assistant they had looked straight through for 5 years. Alive, Lucian stumbled back a step. That's not possible." Evan did not so much as glance at him. He walked the length of the aisle, past 2 centuries of immortals who had never once learned his name, and set a thick folder down on the officiant's podium. "Original records," he said, his quiet voice carrying clear to the back of the stone. "Signed accords. Payment confirmations. Surveillance photographs. The blood ward access logs." He finally turned his head and looked at Caspian, where he knelt in the grip of Seraphine's people. "You forgot one thing." The old elder swallowed. "And what was that?" "You assumed invisible people don't notice who walks past their desk." For a long, courtroom quiet moment, no one in the cathedral breathed. Seraphine looked out over the wreckage of the wedding one last time. Then she reached down to the altar, where the binding accord lay waiting for a signature that would never come. She picked it up and tore it cleanly in half. The sound of ripping parchment cracked through the sanctuary like a bone. "It ends here," she said. Behind her, the badge coats led Caspian and Aldrich toward the doors. The cameras of a dozen news crews exploded into white light on the cathedral steps. Within the hour, the story would be on every screen in the city, the wedding that ended before the vows, the fall of 2 houses, and the assistant who brought down an empire of betrayal from a desk nobody noticed. For several long minutes after the arrests, no one moved. The magnificent cathedral, dressed for the wedding of the decade, now stood hollow under the weight of an entirely different story. Reporters crowded the doors. Flashbulbs lit the broken ceremony like lightning. Seraphine noticed none of it. Her attention had settled, completely, on Evan, standing by the altar, leaning on his cane, every movement still stiff with healing. He looked like he might fall. But he was standing, and that alone felt to Seraphine like a miracle 200 years in the making. Outside, the questions came in a roar. Did your assistant uncover the whole conspiracy? Were you almost assassinated? Is the alliance over? Seraphine ignored every voice and walked to Evan, the crowd parting without quite knowing why. I should go, Evan whispered, shrinking from the cameras. This is your moment, my lady. Seraphine stopped. No, she said. It was never mine. And then she turned to face the reporters and the immortal crowd and the bright, hungry lenses. For 3 nights, every one of you has been asking the wrong question, she said, and the murmur died. You've been asking whether my assistant betrayed me. You should have been asking who protected me. Every camera swung toward the man with the cane. Evan Brooks spent 5 years quietly preventing disasters none of you ever knew existed. He walked into the most secure vault in my house and carried out the proof, and when they came for him, he took a silvered blade to the side and still would not give them what would have killed me. While every one of you assumed the worst of him, he was bleeding on a cold floor to keep you all alive. She paused. You spent 5 years looking straight through him. Tonight, every one of you will know his name. The applause began with a single ancient judge near the cathedral doors. Then another joined. Then another. And within seconds, hundreds of immortals who had never once registered his face were on their feet, applauding the human man who had been invisible to all of them. Evan blinked rapidly. He had spent his whole life avoiding exactly this. Now he could not escape it, and Seraphine watched him not even try to. 3 nights later, the Council of House Ravencroft gathered, and the air in the chamber had changed entirely. Caspian's study had been sealed. New wards had been raised. The traitors awaited trials in courts both mortal and immortal, and the evidence against them was, as Oliver had promised, beyond any denying. Seraphine entered carrying a single folder. Every elder at the long table rose. She did not take her seat at the head. For 2 centuries, this house believed authority belonged to titles, to bloodlines, to age. She set the folder down. We were wrong. She looked toward the open door. Evan, the man hesitated on the threshold. The chamber went utterly still, a room full of ancient predators, watching the one mortal among them. Seraphine crossed to the empty chair at her own right hand and drew it back. This seat has stood empty too long, she said. I'd like you to take it. Evan stared. My lady, I don't belong at this table. No one in this room, Seraphine said, has earned that chair more than you. Slowly, almost disbelieving, Evan sat. Effective tonight, Seraphine told the council. Evan Brooks is my chief strategic partner. Every major decision this house makes will pass through his hands first. Not one voice rose in objection. Not out of fear, out of the simple, late-arriving understanding of exactly how much they all owed the man they had spent 5 years ignoring. That same week, Seraphine drove out alone to the assisted living facility where Marion Brooks lived. Evan's mother looked frailer than her son, but her eyes were the same, quick, knowing, missing nothing. She smiled when Seraphine entered. So, Marion said, you finally went and met my stubborn boy. Seraphine couldn't help the small smile. I did. He gets that from his father. The old woman folded her hands. 5 years he worked for you. 5 years he came home tired and never once complained. I always wondered what kind of person could keep him that long and never see him. The words landed exactly where they were meant to. I was that person, Seraphine said quietly. I'm trying not to be anymore. She handed Marion a slim stack of documents. Marion adjusted her glasses, and her hands began to tremble as she read. What is this? The mortgage on your old house is paid. The medical debts are cleared. Your care here is funded, the best they offer, a private physician on call. For as long as you need it. Tears gathered in the old woman's eyes. You don't owe us anything. Seraphine looked toward the window, toward a horizon she would never see by daylight again. I owe your son more than I'll ever repay, she said. This is only the beginning of it. Weeks passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. The trials began. Caspian Ravencroft, Aldrich Mortlake, and Lucian each faced a mountain of evidence assembled. In the end, by the one person none of them had bothered to count. The Ravencroft territories recovered faster than anyone predicted. Not by luck, but because the man who had quietly kept everything running for 5 years was no longer doing it from the shadows. One evening, after another long night's work, Evan stepped out onto the terrace of Seraphine's study. The harbor glittered far below, ships moving slow and bright across the black water. Seraphine joined him, carrying 2 cups, and handed one over. The cane was gone now. Evan stood on his own. I still think this office is too big, Evan said. You've complained about it every single night. It echoes. I know. Seraphine watched him. I rather like the company in it now. Evan laughed, a real one, soft and unguarded. The first truly easy laugh Seraphine had ever heard from him in 5 years. Then he turned, thoughtful. Can I ask you something? Why didn't you replace me, while I was gone, before you knew the truth, when the whole house was certain I'd betrayed you? Seraphine looked out over the harbor a long moment before she answered. At first, she admitted, I almost believed them. I hate that I did, even for an hour. She turned the cup in her pale hands. But something kept catching. You never broke a single promise to me. Not once, in 5 years. And somewhere in the middle of all that proof against you, I realized I trusted your character more than I trusted the evidence. She looked at Evan. I've been alive 200 years. I've never been able to say that about anyone. Evan's eyes dropped. Thank you, my lady. No, Seraphine said gently. Thank you. They stood together in a silence that had no awkwardness in it at all, only something quiet and steady and new. After a while, Seraphine spoke again. There's one more thing I have to say, and I need you to hear all of it before you answer. Evan waited. Sutton told me, that first night, that the blade was silvered, that you were a finger's width from gone. Seraphine's voice was very low. I could have saved you permanently. You know what I am. One choice, and you'd never be cold again, never go hungry, never be overlooked by my kind for the rest of an eternity. Evan went still. I didn't do it, Seraphine said, because it wasn't mine to choose. You've spent your whole life having choices made for you by people who never bothered to learn your name. I wasn't going to be one more of them, not with the biggest choice of all. She set down her cup. So I'm not offering it to keep you, or because I owe you. I'm offering it because I cannot imagine an eternity without you in it. The partnership, the work, the too big office that echoes, and someday, only if you ever want it, all the rest. Forever on your terms, whenever you're ready, or never at all. For a long moment, Evan didn't speak. The harbor lights moved below them. The man everyone had once called invisible looked at the creature who finally, fully saw him. Then he smiled. That real, unhidden smile. The one he had buried for 5 years under schedules and folders and quiet sacrifice. Ask me again, Evan said softly, when I've had a chance to live a little of this first. The seat at the table. The work in the light instead of the shadows. My mother safe. You, asking instead of assuming. He reached out and, for the first time in 5 years, took Seraphine's cold hand in his warm one. Let me have that. And then ask me again. I will, Seraphine said. As many times as it takes. We have all the time in the world. Behind them, the city turned the way it always had. Ships came and went. Houses rose and fell. Empires changed hands in the dark. But one thing had changed for good. The man everyone had overlooked had become the one person no one could replace. And the immortal who had nearly lost everything had finally learned the oldest truth there is, that loyalty is rarely the loudest voice in the room. More often, it's the quiet one standing beside you every single night, asking for nothing and giving you everything. If you're still with us, you're part of this story now. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell us in the comments which entry in Evan's ledger you think hit the hardest. Nightborn Lady.